The Miami sun is a relentless thing. It beats down on the concrete bridge connecting the mainland to Azure Cay, turning the early morning air into a humid microwave. It was in that heat that Elijah Vance was finishing his 5th mile. His breathing was a steady, rhythmic symphony of conditioned endurance. Sweat soaked the gray Under Armour shirt, clinging to the toned physique of a 45-year-old man with the discipline of an Olympian. He slowed to a jog as he approached the security station, where a gleaming, black wrought iron gate stood like a sentinel, guarding the border between two worlds. This was the entrance to Azure Cay, a private island so exclusive that its palm trees cost more than most cars, and its mansions started in the 8-figure range. "Sir, this entrance is for residents' vehicles only. The pedestrian access is on the other side." The voice was crisp, clean, and colder than the ocean breeze. It came from a woman in a starched white security uniform, her heels clicking against the asphalt like punctuation marks of impatience. She stood at the security post, one hand resting on the console, the other on her hip. A blonde bob, sunglasses despite the soft dawn light, and a radio clipped to her waist like it was a badge of honor. Her name was Brenda Kowalski, head of security for Azure Cay, and in her mind, the man standing at the gate, he didn't belong. He wasn't driving a Bentley. He wasn't wearing a Tom Ford suit. He wasn't even carrying an ID on a lanyard. He was just standing there, a black man, tall, sweat drying on his fitted shirt. His track pants still clung to his calves from the last stretch of his run. No watch, no status markers, just presence. Brenda's eyes swept over him once more, her lips curling into a subtle, dismissive line. Not quite a smirk, not quite a frown. "I said, delivery and service access is down the hill," she repeated, the courtesy in her tone now gone. She didn't move. Neither did he. He didn't answer right away. He took a step forward, crossing the painted yellow line on the ground, just close enough for the motion sensor to let out a sharp, electronic buzz. The gate's light blinked red. "Access denied." Brenda's brow raised. "Sir, you are not authorized to trigger that sensor. Step back." "I live here," Elijah said, his voice low but certain, carrying no hint of a question. A beat, then a pause just long enough to be disrespectful. Brenda tilted her head. "And I'm the Queen of England," she scoffed, turning to her radio. "Unit 3. I have a male subject attempting to force sensor activation at Gate 1. No visible ID. Non-compliant tone. Possible squatter situation." Squatter. The word hung in the air, as heavy as smoke in a closed room. Elijah didn't flinch. His eyes scanned past her to the manicured hedges, to the marble plaque engraved with his estate's crest, a rising phoenix half-covered by a low-hanging bougainvillea branch. He had designed this home, chosen every stone, every railing, every inch of that gate. But none of that mattered in this moment. What she saw was a black man in sweatpants, and that was all it took. Behind him, a small catering van pulled in. The logo Artisan Bites Catering was painted in a pastel green. The driver, a young man named Leo, slowed down, saw the standoff, raised an eyebrow, and instinctively reached for his phone. Brenda stepped forward, her voice now sharp. "If you are not off this property in 30 seconds, I am calling the Miami-Dade Police Department. And trust me, trespassing is not a light charge in this neighborhood." Elijah raised an eyebrow, finally speaking again. "Do you always threaten residents like that, or just the ones who don't show up in a Rolls-Royce?" Brenda's voice sharpened like a razor. "Don't get smart with me. This is a private security matter. You are escalating this situation." "No," Elijah said, his voice uncannily calm. "You are—" From the corner of the street, Leo's phone camera was already rolling. The gate was still closed, but the clock on justice had just started ticking. Brenda Kowalski didn't blink. She wasn't just holding her position. No, she was performing. One heel forward, her uniform still pristine. Her voice just loud enough for Leo's phone to catch it. "You look lost." "Sir, this is private property." The gate buzzed again. Still red. Elijah didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. But his eyes locked onto Brenda's like he had just flipped a switch somewhere inside her world. A switch she hadn't yet realized existed. "I already told you," he said. "I live here." Brenda tilted her head, amused. "Right, and I moonlight as a princess." She tapped her radio again. "Unit 4, requesting backup. I have a 1016, repeat. Suspicious individual claiming residency, possible impersonator, approaching pedestrian gate without vehicle clearance." The code was fabricated, but the tone wasn't. Behind her, 2 more security officers emerged. One had his tactical vest half zipped. The other was still sipping coffee from a stainless steel mug. They slowed as they saw Elijah, their brows knitting together. "Who's this?" one of them asked. "Someone who thinks he owns the place," Brenda replied without breaking her gaze. The man in the vest stepped closer, eyeing Elijah's shirt. "You with maintenance?" Before Elijah could answer, Brenda cut in. "He says he's a resident. We're still verifying." "You could just ask for his name," the younger guard started to say, but Brenda silenced him with a single, sharp glance. Elijah exhaled, slow and deliberate. "I don't need to prove my identity to a woman who hasn't earned the right to question it." That's when Brenda stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Listen, sir, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this isn't one of those gotcha TikTok videos. You're not going viral off of me." Elijah gave a half smile. "Not amused," he said, his tone measured. "This isn't for TikTok. This is for legacy." She flinched, but before she could fire back, Leo, the catering guy, stepped forward slightly, his voice tentative but clear. "Hey, I've delivered to this address before. That's the Vance estate, right? Mr. Elijah Vance." Brenda snapped her head toward him. "Sir, step back. This does not concern you." But it did now, because the name had been said out loud. Elijah Vance. A name that echoed across tech conferences, Forbes covers, and real estate summits. But without the suit and the car, it was just a name. Brenda smirked. "Elijah Vance, please, if you're so important, where's your ID, your badge, your driver?" Elijah looked at her for a long moment. Then, finally, he reached into the zip pocket near his waistband and pulled out a phone. The screen had a crack in the corner. He dialed one number. "Isabel," he said, his voice as casual as if ordering breakfast. "They're escalating at Gate 1. Activate Protocol Phoenix." On the other end, a calm female voice replied, "Understood. Elijah, executing now. Oh, wait. My camera feed just picked up a patrol car approaching." The moment her voice said his name, the 2 guards shifted uncomfortably. Their confidence wavered, but Brenda's didn't. She laughed, a desperate attempt to reclaim control. "A phone call, that's your power move. Anyone can hire someone to pretend." She turned toward the panel. "Override or not, you're not." But she was interrupted. Not by the gate opening, but by the rising wail of a siren. A Miami-Dade Police Department patrol car turned off the main road, its red and blue lights flashing, painting everyone's faces in strobes of alarm. The car screeched to a halt behind Leo's van. 2 officers stepped out. The older one, a seasoned cop named Miller, had the weary face of a man who'd seen it all. The younger one, Officer Diaz had sharp eyes that darted around, assessing the scene. Miller walked up to Brenda. "What's the situation, Brenda?" "Thank God you're here, Officer Miller," she said, her tone now dripping with the performance of a victim. "This subject has been attempting to trespass, refuses to comply, and is claiming to own one of the estates. He has no identification." Miller turned to Elijah, his gaze sweeping from the running shoes to the sweat-damp hair. It was a pre-programmed look, born from years of experience and bias. "Sir," he said, his voice a command, "let me see your hands and your identification." Elijah didn't look at Miller. He was still looking at Brenda. "You've gone too far," he said, his voice low and cold. "Did you not hear me?" Miller stepped forward, his hand dropping to rest on his holstered weapon. "Hands up, ID out, now." The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Leo swallowed hard, but his hand on his phone never wavered. And that's when Brenda made her final, fatal mistake. Emboldened by the presence of the police, she felt invincible. She stepped close to Elijah, her face inches from his, and whispered with pure venom, just loud enough for him to hear. "See, doesn't matter how much money you think you have. Out here, when the cops show up, you're still just another n-r." Elijah didn't react. There was no anger, no fear. His eyes just went empty, as cold and deep as an abyss. Then he spoke, his voice clear, ringing out in the morning stillness. "Officer Miller, I suggest you call your superior, Lieutenant Thompson. Tell him Elijah Vance is at Gate 1 of Azure K, and a security employee has just violated U.S. Federal Code, Title 18, Sections 241 and 242 right in front of you." Officer Miller froze. The name Elijah Vance, the name Lieutenant Thompson, and the precise citation of federal civil rights statutes. This was not a typical trespasser. But Brenda didn't get it. She laughed out loud. "Oh, you're a lawyer now. Look, Miller, just cuff him. Let him tell his fairy tales downtown." Miller hesitated, looking from Brenda's crazed confidence to Elijah's terrifying calm. But he didn't have to make a decision. Because a black, silent, impossibly long Mercedes Maybach had just glided to a stop behind the police car. The rear door opened. A woman emerged, Isabel Reed, dressed in a cream-colored power suit, her dark hair in a severe, elegant bun. She carried the aura of a person who never had to raise her voice to be heard. She looked at Brenda, then at Miller, and finally, at Elijah. "I told you not to go running without your security detail. Elijah," she said, her tone a mix of warm exasperation and steel. Then she turned to Miller, the smile vanishing. "Officer, I am Isabel Reed, counsel for Mr. Vance, and also the chair of the Azure K Governing Board. I believe Miss Kowalski here, and you, officer, have just created a very, very expensive legal problem for the city of Miami. And for yourselves." The air shattered. Isabel Reed's arrival, with the silent black Maybach and the power suit, was a quiet bomb that had just detonated. She wasn't just a lawyer. She was the chair of the board. Brenda Kowalski's authority, a thing built of a uniform and an iron gate, evaporated in an instant. Officer Miller's face went pale. He'd been on the force long enough to know the smell of a legal catastrophe. The name Elijah Vance, now attached to a high-powered attorney and a $500,000 car, had transformed into a live landmine. "The board of directors," Brenda stammered, the words catching in her throat. "No, that's not possible." Isabel ignored her. Her ice-cold gaze was fixed on Officer Miller. "Officer, you drew your weapon on an unarmed, non-threatening citizen based on the word of a private security employee. Worse, you stood by while that employee used racist, hateful language. This entire incident..." She gestured with her chin toward Leo's still-recording phone. "Is on camera." Officer Diaz, the younger cop, took an involuntary step back. He wanted to be as far from this situation as possible. But Miller didn't move. 20 years on the force were flashing before his eyes. Cornered. His instincts kicked in, not wisdom, but belligerence. "Ma'am," Miller said, trying to regain his official tone. "This man refused to provide identification. That's obstruction. I was following procedure." "Procedure." Isabel let out a dry, mirthless laugh. "Your procedure ended the moment you chose to believe a bigot over doing your own due diligence. But fine, let's follow procedure." She turned to Elijah. "Elijah, please show the officer your identification." Elijah, who had remained silent during this exchange, slowly reached into his back pocket. He didn't pull out a wallet. He pulled out a second phone, a matte black, logo-less device that looked more like a futuristic artifact than a commercial product. He unlocked it with his thumbprint, the screen flaring to life with a complex series of charts and data streams. He swiped through a few screens and then handed it to Miller. On the screen was a digital Florida state ID, name Elijah Vance, address 1, Azure K, Miami. But that wasn't all. Below it were a series of embedded documents, the deed to the Phoenix estate, and then the final document. The one that made Miller's breath catch in his throat. It was the legal charter for a corporation named Vance Heritage Holdings, LLC, and under the line item, Assets Owned, there was only one entry, the entirety of the land and property of Azure K, Miami, Florida. Miller looked up, his eyes wide, disbelief warring with the cold, hard fact in front of him. You own the entire island." "For over 6 months now," Isabel answered for Elijah. "Mr. Vance prefers his privacy. He acquired the entire island through a parent corporation to avoid unnecessary attention. Ms. Kowalski here and her 2 colleagues," she glanced at the now ashen-faced guards, "are employees of a security firm contracted by Mr. Vance's company. They are, in essence, on the payroll of the man they just called a squatter." The impact was seismic. Leo lowered his phone slightly, his mouth agape. The 2 security guards looked at each other, sheer horror dawning on their faces. They hadn't just made a mistake. They had challenged the god of their tiny universe. Brenda took a stumbling step back, her entire worldview collapsing. The black man in sweatpants wasn't just a resident. He was the owner. He was the king of the island. The truth was too absurd, too impossible to process. "Lies," she whispered, a feeble protest. "It's all lies. You faked it. You can't be." "Enough." Elijah's voice cut through the air, tinged for the first time with a sliver of ice. He looked directly at Brenda, and in his gaze, she didn't see anger. She saw a cold, clinical pity. "Your ignorance could have been forgiven. Your hatred cannot." Officer Miller hastily handed the phone back, as if it were burning his hand. He fumbled for his radio. "Dispatch, get me Lieutenant Thompson. Urgent!" There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then a gruff voice crackled through. "Thompson here. What is it, Miller?" "Lieutenant," Miller said, his voice trembling, "I'm at Gate 1 of Azure K. There's a situation involving Mr. Elijah Vance." A long pause stretched from the other end of the line. Then Thompson's voice came back, no longer gruff but laced with alarm. "Which Elijah Vance are you talking about? You don't mean Vance of—" "Yes, sir, that's him. There's been a misunderstanding with security." "A misunderstanding." Thompson's voice boomed through the radio, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Miller, Do you have any idea it took the department 6 months to get a 15-minute meeting with that man about funding our youth program? Do you know he owns half the tech sector downtown? What the hell are you doing over there? You pray to God you haven't put him in cuffs. No, sir, but... No buts. You apologize immediately. You make sure Mr. Vance has whatever he needs, and you get out of there. And Miller... Thompson's voice dropped, low and menacing. We'll be having a talk when you get back to the precinct. The line went dead. Officer Miller turned, his face the color of chalk. He looked at Elijah, his arrogance completely gone, replaced by raw, naked fear. Mr. Vance, I am so sorry. There's been a terrible mistake. We'll be leaving now. He motioned to Diaz, and the two of them scrambled back to their patrol car as if the ground were on fire. The car peeled out, leaving a void of tense, ringing silence. Now, it was just Brenda and her two colleagues, facing their master, stripped of her police backup. Brenda looked small and lost. But instead of remorse, the collapse of her authority ignited something else inside her, a venomous resentment. Her prejudice wasn't a momentary lapse, it was her core. And when that core was challenged, it didn't break. It hardened. So that's it, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. Money. You just buy everything. You buy a house. You buy an island. You buy respect. But you can't buy blood. She looked Elijah dead in the eye. And you don't belong here. This place was built by pioneers, by great families. You're just new money. An outsider playing king. Isabel started to step forward, but Elijah held up a hand to stop her. He took one step toward Brenda. You're right about one thing, he said unexpectedly. I didn't just buy this island. He looked past her, over the magnificent estates, toward some invisible point on the horizon. My ancestors were here long before there was a bridge or an iron gate. They were freedmen, fishermen who lived and worked on this very land after the Civil War. They called it Phoenix Cove. Isabel produced a file from her leather briefcase and handed it to Leo, who was still standing frozen. Young man, please keep recording. This needs to be documented. She continued, her voice resonating like a historian in a courtroom. In 1923, a group of wealthy white investors from the North decided this stretch of coast was too valuable for their kind. They used unjust laws, intimidation, and violence to force every single black family off this land. They paid them pennies on the dollar, bulldozed their small village, and built the first exclusive yacht club. They renamed it Azure Cay. She paused, letting the weight of the history settle. One of the families that was driven out, the family that fought the hardest and lost everything, was the Vance family. Mr. Elijah's great-great-grandfather was born right where we are standing. The world seemed to stop spinning. This wasn't a story about a black CEO being profiled. This was a century-long story of reclamation. Elijah Vance hadn't returned as a buyer. He had returned as an heir, reclaiming his stolen legacy. Brenda stared at Elijah, her face contorted in a grotesque mask of shock, disgust, and hatred. This revelation didn't humble her. It made her feel violated on a primal level. To her, Elijah wasn't just an intruder in her space, he was a ghost from the past, an inversion of what she believed to be the natural order. And then, she said the words that would seal her fate forever. Her voice trembled with rage, all pretense gone. So you're one of them, she hissed. Come back to take what isn't yours. This land was cleansed once. It was supposed to stay clean. Cleansed. The word hung in the air, malevolent and permanent. It was no longer an insult. It was a genocidal declaration. The other two security guards physically recoiled from Brenda, as if she were contagious. Leo raised his phone higher, making sure he captured every detail of her hate-twisted face. Elijah said nothing. He just looked at her. A look that no longer held pity, only the resolve of a man about to deliver judgment. He took out his phone again. "Isabel," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Initiate the final phase. Full spectrum." The words were spoken with the finality of a judge's gavel. They weren't loud, but they echoed in the sudden, dead silence of the causeway. Brenda Kowalski stared, her mind failing to grasp the meaning, but her gut understood the threat. The two other guards, their faces a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension, looked at Elijah as if he were about to call down fire from the heavens. Isabel Reed tapped a command into her tablet. The effect was instantaneous and devastatingly precise. The first thing to die was the gate. The red light on the control panel beside Brenda flickered and went dark. The panel itself emitted a low hum, then went completely black. She instinctively slapped at the non-responsive screen. The second thing to die was her authority, a synthesized voice, crisp and emotionless, erupted not from a single speaker, but from the entire perimeter's public address system, a network Elijah had installed weeks ago. "Security alert, employee ID 74B, Brenda Kowalski, credentials permanently revoked, access to all Azure case systems is terminated, effective immediately." The radio on Brenda's hip crackled once with static, then went silent. The magnetic lock on her own side gate, the one she used to enter the security booth, clicked audibly, locking her out. She was now a trespasser at her own post. "You can't do this!" she shrieked, the sound thin and pathetic against the system's booming voice. The two other guards flinched. One of them, the younger one, ripped his earpiece out as if it were contaminated. The other spoke, his voice shaky but firm. "Brenda, it's over." "Over?" she spat, turning on them with wild eyes. "You're just going to let him—" The PA system cut her off. "Security protocol update. All personnel formerly reporting to Manager Kowalski are to report to Isabel Reed, interim head of security. Failure to comply will result in immediate termination and escort from the premises." There was no choice to be made. It was an order from the new god. The two men straightened up, turned their backs on Brenda, and faced Isabel with a newfound, if terrified, sense of duty. Elijah took a step forward, his running shoes making no sound on the pavement. He stopped directly in front of the now powerless Brenda. "My great-great-grandfather died a broken man," he said, his voice low and intensely personal, meant only for her and the recording phone. "They took his land, his home, and his dignity. He spent the rest of his life working in a sugarcane field, dreaming of a home he could never return to. He died believing his legacy was erased." He paused, letting the weight of his family's history fill the space between them. "When I was a boy, my grandmother told me his story. She didn't tell it with anger. She told it with a promise. She said, 'One day, son, someone has to go back, not to fight, but to build something so strong on that stolen ground that it can never be swept away again.'" Brenda stared at him, her hatred curdling into a twisted knot of disbelief. This was all planned." "This," Elijah said, gesturing to the scene around them, "was a contingency. I had hoped for a quiet life, but I was prepared for the world as it is, not as I wish it to be. I was prepared for you." Isabel's voice joined the quiet judgment. "Ms. Kowalski, the video footage of this encounter, including your use of a racial slur and your declaration about cleansing this land, has already been sent to the Miami-Dade District Attorney's Office, the Florida Civil Rights Division, and the board of your former employer, Titan Security, a multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit for wrongful detainment, racial discrimination, and intentional infliction of emotional distress will be filed before lunch. Every word was a nail in the coffin of Brenda's life. She lost her job, her reputation, and was now facing financial ruin and possible criminal charges. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The foundation of her world, built on a brittle sense of superiority, had been pulverized into dust. Elijah looked past her, toward the gate that now stood open, beckoning him home. Leo, the catering driver, finally lowered his phone, his face a mask of awe. "Mr. Vance," Leo said, his voice barely a whisper. What do you want me to do with this video?" Elijah turned to him, and for the first time, a faint, weary smile touched his lips. "Put it online," he said. "Put it everywhere. Let people see. Let them see what happens when hate meets legacy." He gave a final, dismissive glance at the shell of the woman who had tried to deny him his home. He didn't need to say another word. The system had already spoken. Justice wasn't just coming. It had arrived. Without looking back, Elijah Vance walked through the gate. He didn't walk like a man who had just won a fight. He walked like a man who was simply coming home, his every footstep a quiet reclamation of history, a promise to his grandmother fulfilled. He walked up the marble steps of the Phoenix estate, the rising sun catching the glass and steel, making it shine like a beacon. Behind him, Brenda Kowalski finally crumpled, sinking to her knees on the hot asphalt, a relic of a past that had just been rendered obsolete. She wasn't just fired. She was erased. And on the screen of Leo's phone, as he prepared to hit upload, the live stream counter was already ticking past 100,000 viewers, each one a witness to the moment a king reclaimed his throne, not with a sword, but with a story. The story wasn't just his. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. And today, they all walked through that gate with him. Thank you for following this story. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. If you'd like more inspiring stories about justice and resilience, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We'll be back tomorrow with another must-see story you won't want to miss.